Okay, you should have watched the video with the animal in the operant box, and what you saw is the loud sound caused the animal to flinch, in this case a rat flinch, and with successive exposures to that loud sound, it decreased its flinching, right? It habituated to the sound, right? The jumping or the flinching decreases after several exposures to that. That's what we mean by habituation. Some other examples. So Tank, which you'll learn about in class. Tank is the dog that you see on your Canvas course. He's my dog. Tank is learning dog agility, and so we'll see some more examples of this as the semester unfolds. But one of the things that you have to do is you have to get the animals to habituate to some of the sounds of the obstacles. So there's this thing called a teeter, which teeters up and down. And when it teeters up and down, it creates a really loud sound. And so you don't want the dogs to be scared of the apparatus. So what you do is the trainers just had us walk around the teeter multiple times while they were, flipping it back and forth, making the sound so that they would habituate to it. Then they would be ready to be trained, right? Police have to do this for gunshots with dogs or with horses when they have animals working with them, right? They don't want the animal to be scared of the gunshots should an officer have to discharge their firearm. They would want the animals to be able to deal with that kind of situation. So they have to train them for that. That requires lots of training and lots of repeated exposure. They also will take them to all different kinds of settings so that they habituate to all kinds of distractions, people, situations, things like that. So these are examples, animal examples of habituation. There's human examples as well. So at my dad's house, he lived near a train track, and in the middle of the night, it was the corridor from the northeast, and you would hear this train go through in the middle of the night when you first sort of stayed there. But as you got used to it, or as you stayed multiple nights, you would sort of learn to sort of sleep through it. Eventually, you didn't even hear it. It was habituation, right? You might experience habituation if you don't hear sounds in a classroom, right? So sounds from the ventilation system or sounds outside the classroom. If you can ignore those sounds or don't really hear those sounds, you have habituated to sounds in that environment. So how do we know that this is learning? How do we know that habituation is actually learning and not some other thing? Now, one of the things, if you're dealing with animals, you can't ask them what they're experiencing. So it could be that the animal's just too tired to respond. So think about that rat in the operant box there. Maybe it didn't respond to the loud sounds because it was just too tired, fatigue. Or maybe the sound was so loud that it caused damage to its hearing. So if it can no longer hear the sound, it's not going to respond to it. So how do we know this? Well, if you change something about the context, the response will come back. So like with the rat in the operant box, if all of a sudden we added a light that came on at the same time as the sound was played, the animal would then flinch again. The response would return. And that's evidence that it is learning. It's learned to habituate, not that it's too tired or not that there's sensory damage, right? The other thing you could do to change the context is put it in a different box. It would have to be like visually distinct, but put it into a different box and all of a sudden the animal would respond again, showing that it's learned to that particular situation, right? So this is why the police officers have to train for many different situations, because if you just did gun training in one particular place, the animal might habituate to that one particular place, but then the response would be present in another context. So my last question for you is, why do we habituate? Why do you think this is important? Why do we learn to ignore? Now, the point here, I think, that if you think about this for a second, is that if there are no consequences in your environment to whatever the stimuli is, like the sound or the sight, if there's no positive or negative consequences to that stimulus, we should ignore it. And we should ignore it so that we can attend to important stimuli, right? We have a barrage of auditory and visual sort of stimuli, so we need to sort of sift through that. So one of the ways we can sift through that is learning not to ignore to things that are not important. It's a very simple form of learning, the simplest type of learning, just learning to ignore, habituation. So you'll also see this later when you read the Garcia and Colling paper for the reading reflection. Pay attention. They talk about habituation. They habituate their animal to their experimental apparatus. And I want you to just pay attention to that and sort of notice that. So these are things that will come back up. These concepts will come back up in our class over time.